Hi everyone, Mark from Audio Pursuit. And today I would like to finish our tour of vintage Adcom with the GFP-565 preamplifier. And in all due honesty, my favorite piece in my collection. Now, the 565 is special because of one thing. And that is the combination of product mastermind Victor Campos and Walt Jung, the electrical engineer behind all this. These two men got together, and what they decided to do was to use the very best parts possible that would keep the unit affordable, yet would just dominate the competition. Now, a little bit of background on this. If you recall, for those of you who've been around as long as I have, and for those of you who haven't, you may have seen, Adcom came up with a radical theory when they came up with this series with the louvered design and so forth. And that was that the amplifiers would be separate from the preamplifier in the tuner. So instead of going an integrated amp in a tuner, they said nope, pure amplifier and then a combo preamp and tuner. And this kind of set the industry on its ear a bit. That really hadn't been thought of. Now, their first version of that preamplifier tuner was the GFP-565. Well, I would like to say it was a great little preamp tuner. It wasn't. I bought one. And what I experienced is what many people, if you went onto the various boards that were on the internet, and I bought it used sometime later, it had significant bleed through from the tuner into every other source. Drove me nuts, and I thought it was just my unit. Well, I went checking, sure enough, others had the same problem. So while it was a neat design, it needed help. And Jung and Campos got together with, from what I understand, in the GFP-400, and they kind of solved that. Well, same thing happens here with the 565. Adcom had out the separate GFP-555 preamplifier. But that had the pricing compromises in it. For this unit, they said, let's redesign from the beginning. Let us go through every point and let us have separate power supplies for the inputs. Let's make ourselves a phono section that will rival anything anywhere close to its price range. We're going to make it flat, but we're going to design it a little differently. Now, turns out that Walter Jung was an expert at op amps and that sort of thing. He was one of the gurus of the time. Now, I don't want to go into all the details about it because, honestly, I'm not an expert in that area. But I will tell you is if you want to know more about the design and the engineering involved in bringing the 565 to life, Gary Gallo did a terrific in-depth review in Stereophile in late 1989, maybe 1990. You can find it online. I urge you to read it if you're fascinated with that part of it. It really is an outstanding look at the engineering. Okay, before we get started, let's take a look at the basics of the 565. Now, once again, you got the rocker / toggle switch. Remember what I said? This is the way to go. Don't go with any sort of Adcom with the push button. Get the rocker. Now, the knobs are kind of a neat design. They're a little different. They look like a beak, or for some of you, if you remember what the cartridge from Ortofon's P-mount units look like. Kind of like that. So it's got kind of an eagle's beak, as I would like to refer to it. Now, the rotation is heavy on all three, and it has a nice little stick point for dead center. So kudos on that. Now you have one for your balance, bass, and treble. And remember, this was in the day where people still messed around a lot. People were adjusting quite a bit. I remember doing that in my younger days. So nothing uncommon there. And you're starting to see some people go back to that now with their integrated amplifiers, interestingly enough. Then you have basically some control buttons here. Now you have your tone in, your contour. And contour is your loudness, your high filter, because in some cases, some people thought they heard a high frequency rumble, and so that would cut that out. You had the mono switch, which is kind of interesting. I haven't really seen too many of those. But the mono switch was really neat for those people who said, hey, I've got an old Beatles recording. I don't want to mess around with it. I want to hear it in mono. Or if they just want to say, hey, how would this sound in mono? So they had that. And then finally, a processor in switch. So not just for equalizers, but if you recall at this time, DBX was making separate boxes that were kind of the rage for a lot of people. I thought about it and kind of passed on it, but I knew a lot of people who invested in the DBX boxes and loved them. Next up is what I consider some really great ergonomics, and probably the finest setup that I've seen. And that was how they used the switches for recording out versus listening. Now, most companies had two separate labels and they had knobs this way and that way. Adcom simplified it, and they're really easy for people. So basically, for the record out, you just selected which source you're going to use. And then on the other hand, you picked which one you wanted to listen to. Very simple. Once again, a heavy feel, nice solid clicks. You can actually hear the clicks. And then finally, you got your volume control. Now, the volume doesn't have as quite heavy of a feel as the others, but still solid. And in all years I've had it, I've never had to run deaux on it. So it really has stayed very clean, very well designed. Around back, you got kind of a standard layout for the first part anyway. You have your phono with your ground, and this could take either MC or MM, although you would still need the preamp boost for the MM. You have your CD, your tuner, and then, what's really neat, you got your tape 1 with your record out, and then your ins. Tape 2, same thing. Video auxiliary. Remember, at this time, HiFi VHS VCRs were the rage. I had one. Matter of fact, I had 2. And boy, I loved listening to my stuff in stereo. Any movies that we rented from Blockbuster, wherever, you bet we were going to hear it. Then you have your signal processor setup. In and outs there. Once again, equalizer or DBX. Then finally, you have 3 outputs. Bypass. Now, the really neat thing about bypass is, like the bypass switch on the front, is the fact that the bypass completely avoided the circuitry. The design layout actually sent the signal directly to it, did not get cut off or routed around that way. No, it went directly from its input source point and then on out. So really, really well designed. And then 2, that you could modify by either hitting the bypass button or stay in the regular mode. So 3 outputs there. Really, really slick. Fine design. And then finally, in accordance with products of this time period, there are 2 switch and 1 on switch. Now, I want to warn you, don't hook your amplifier up to these. Use it for your tuner, once again, equalizer, those type things, your turntable, but definitely leave the amplifier on its own, plugged directly into either your surge suppressor or into the wall. So how does the Adcom GFP-565 sound? Well, first of all, slightly warm. Just ever so slightly warm. but more importantly, it sounds nice. It doesn't sound veiled or heavily shaded. Not that at all. Just a hint of warmth. Is it as absolutely as clear as my reference Parasound P5? No. But that's also a very, very neutral preamplifier, and it's also some 20 years newer by design. So they're, we got to kind of give and take here a bit. But I will tell you this, the couple of times that I've loaned out my P5 for other people, I put this one into play, I haven't missed it. I missed the remote off the P5, but other than that, didn't bother me. It's just a really fine sounding preamplifier. And to be honest with you, I love the phono section in this. The phono, I mean, when you play your turntable, it is so good sounding for a built-in. I mean, honestly, it is just stunningly good. And once again, that goes back to Wal Chung and C. Victor Campos and their goal of designing it. And once again, read the Stereophile article, because it was designed in a slightly different way than most preamplifiers are, especially built-in ones. And it will give you all the details you need. Cartridge usage, well, in my case, I've had this around, so I previously had it plugged in with my Riga RP1 with the Ortofon Super OM40. Sounded terrific. Nowadays, do my tremors, I use a Technics linear tracker, the SLJ2, with the Stanton 3000 cartridge. Really nice setup there. Really, exceptional. Last night I was listening to a Windham Hill recording, and probably my cleanest one. It's Shadowfax, and man, just really, really pleasant listening to this. The other inputs, well, for CD, what I do is, I have my off-board Denafrips Aries 2, plug in that, and then that comes into this. Terrific. They blend really well, although I did use it in the oversampling mode. I found that the non-oversampling or NOS mode, between the two was a little too warm, so I went with oversampling. And once again, options. My Nakamichi RX202 cassette deck, the one of the two models that has the door that opens up and spins the cassette and brings back in. Really neat sounding here. Just a whole lot of fun. It was great to go back and listen to all the vinyl that when I first bought, the first thing I do is I would record it before it got all the pops and clicks. And so I had these master copies. And so it was just really fun to go back and listen to Bob Seger's Against the Wind and Live Bullet tapes, which actually have held up really well. Thankfully, a dry climate helps. So when you go across with the various inputs, you get just great options. And you get this wonderful sounding preamplifier. Now, what do these go for these days? Well, if you look up on the used market, here's the interesting thing. A GFP-565 costs about $200 on average. The 565, because it's so well thought of and so sought out, these are $450 to $500 depending on the time of year for one in good shape. I even saw one for $600 that had just gone through complete servicing. So you're going to spend a few bucks for it, but what you're going to get is just a tremendous improvement. And here's the other interesting thing in listening. When you hook these up to an Adcom amplifier, especially the big beast, the GFA-555, you don't hear as much grain. And that amplifier, as I said in my review, does have some graininess to it when compared to current models. They're similar. But for some reason, with this preamplifier, where they did it on purpose or by accident. Maybe it's that slightly warm intonation. That grain, it's lessened noticeably. Very interesting stuff. So just to give you an idea, this is a well match. You know, there's a reason why people talk about synergy. The 565 creates great synergy with the 555 amplifier, the GFA-545, and the GFA-535, the little sledgehammer. So don't be afraid. Enjoy. And finally, like I like to remind you once again, since you're buying vintage, if you're doing it online, make sure that you get pictures of the inside. Make sure all the capacitors are good shape, they're not leaking. If so, get that price down because you're going to want to have it serviced. So make sure it's tested out and you know what you're getting into. So get those photographs, everybody. In the end, I'm not selling this. I thought for a while about selling this piece, but playing it again, it's like, no, I can't do it. I like it too dang much. So it's going to become, or really stay, a part of my stable of gear. Now my wife thinks I'm crazy, and maybe I'm a little bit, but you know, I've learned the hard way. Don't give up on things that are really good just because you see something new. Hang on to it, save your nickels, and go buy that air piece another way. So until next time, take care.